What's up, Photoshop fam? I'm Rick Navarro, and this is the Pixel Laundry Photoshop Academy. Now, the longer I drag out, the longer the gradient is going to be. The shorter I drag, the tighter that edge is going to be. So you can see that you can kind of give it different effects with just the tool within itself. Now let's say I wanted to invert this mask. I just hit Command I and invert it so that it applies to everything outside. Okay, you can invert the mask right from the mask itself. Okay. Now, what about selections? Now, just like the previous lesson with selections where we talked about where you can actually use one of your selection tools and make a selection, you can use gradients to also create selections as well. And the way you do that is the same way that you're creating a mask, or let's go ahead and create a new layer and apply just a regular black and white gradient on here. If I hit Command and hover over the layer that I just created, it's going to grab the entire layer, right? But if I create a layer and put a foreground to background on it, or excuse me, a foreground to transparent, okay, now it's going to grab it in a way that is not grabbing the entire layer, but it's grabbing just the part that's been painted. All right, now how would that help us? So let's say, again, I'm doing several images that have the same similar image in them, and I want to save that gradient so that I can apply it across the board, multiple images, without having to recreate it every single time. So you'll create that gradient, you'll clip it right here, or excuse me, you'll hover over this mouse, you'll hover over this layer right here, and you'll hold down your Command or your Control key, and you'll see the little marquee come up over your mouse, and that is to select the layer, or to select the objects in the layer. And right now, if I go over into my channels, you can kind of see how it's being applied here. Actually, before we do that, let's turn the layer off. All right. Now, if I go up to Select and Save Selection, it's going to ask me to rename it and if I want a new channel. So let's just call this Gradient. And notice that it didn't matter what the color of the gradient was. Now I can deselect that, and look what happened over here in our channels palette. We have a new channel, an alpha channel, which basically is transparencies. It's not necessarily your color information, because your color information is held here in your red, your green, and your blue. It's going to show up as black and white, but when these RGB channels are all turned on at the same time, then you're getting color information. But this last one here is just a black and white layer, and look what it's done. It's shown us exactly my previous selection. Now I want you to notice something, that the selection, even though was kind of like right around here, like in fact, if I select on it, it's showing you that it looks like the edge is cutting off here. But I guarantee you that that selection is also including all of this gradation that's happening all the way down to the black. So right there, I've saved a selection that I didn't have before, and I can use the selection to apply any of my other adjustment layer functions. Let's invert it and see what happens there. So again, now it's going to apply it down towards the bottom. And that's how you save a selection, and that's how you use gradients as a selection. That's also how you use gradient masks. The major difference between your gradient mask and your selection tools is that your selection tools are going to give you maybe a more precise type of selection based off of either the color parameters or the edge parameters or the pixel colors, but they're not going to give you like a faded selection. So like I wouldn't use gradient masks, for something like this. Like this is a very, a much more specific type of selection. However, if I was doing something globally and making, maybe a larger edit like this, and let's just drop this down to like something like that, and I wanted to apply a mask here, let's load the mask that we previously had. If you go back down into your selection and you go load selection, now I can pick my gradient mask. It was down here. If I click that, there we go. Now I can use this And let's just fill it instead of using the gradient tool, because technically this selection already is a gradient. If I fill this with black, I should technically see a gradient happen. And there you go. Notice how it's fading off nice and subtly. There's a little bit more of like a computer generated edge as opposed to trying to come in with a brush and maybe manipulating that by hand. I'm going to go over here into my brush settings, and I want to, you see this little jagged edge that's happening? It's controlled here by my spacing. See, even all the way down here into the purples, it took some of that color off because I was using that gradient selection. And notice how it went away here. Still got a little bit of it left here. I can come in here and clean this up. Or I can reverse it and have it only apply to the outside. But as you can see, this can be a little bit more of a laborious process to do this with a brush, you know, or to maybe feather those edges in a way that you like, in which case I can come in here with my foreground to transparent and fade those off relatively nicely. There's another mode that's very similar to this, and that's called quick mask mode. And this is another tool to allow you to make masks relatively quickly. And basically, if I make a selection on an object and I hit Q, this is my quick mask mode. Okay, this is quick mask mode. It's also found right down here. Okay, if I go to my standard editing, or if I hit on that, that's going to go quick mask. And the way quick mask works is it uses your brush and color tools in order to create masks for you. So everything you see here, if I double click on this, it will bring up these options, and everything that is in masked areas is going to be red, or I can invert that into selected areas. So I made a selection right here in the middle, and if I hit Q, it's going to show red. And basically I like that mode. That's my preference of working. But I can paint on my selection with a brush as opposed to maybe trying to draw around the edge. This is especially helpful if you don't have a Wacom tablet, or if you're just working on a mouse or with a mouse. You know, you can make relatively tight selections with your quick mask by making a selection and then grabbing a brush and making your selection pretty broad. And again, if I invert, this is like painting with a mask. So if I invert it to white, it's going to take away. I've essentially created a mask that is not visible here in the layers palette, but it is visible here on screen. So I've got a soft brush right now because I want a softer edge, and I'm adding and I'm taking away in areas that maybe the mask is too much, or I need to add a little bit more. Okay, and then the way you get out of that is just hit Q again, and look how my selection has grown now. So you can do the same thing with your gradient tool, like I said earlier. Like this, let's just go ahead and save this one. This is how you would save that, the same way you would save your gradient. So let's just call this face selection. Okay, and let's load that previous selection gradient. And if I hit Q, now you have another representation. Instead of going maybe into the channels, which might be confusing, you have another visual representation of how you can see your masks. Okay, and in the same way, you can paint on or you can paint off. And then when I want to get out, I hit Q. I loved quick mask in the beginning. This was one of the first ways I learned how to mask and how to move relatively quickly in Photoshop back when I was starting. So this is a great tool for beginners. As you get a little bit more advanced, you're going to end up leaning towards masks because masks give you a greater level of control. I mean, I could get down here to the individual hair if I wanted to. You could do that in quick mask, but then you're going to want to be able to preserve that and see that and make those edits very quickly. Now, the thing is that this is not preserving your selection until you convert it into a formal mask. This is just basically giving you a visual way of making your selection relatively quickly. So once I'm done with this, you know, if I let's go ahead and load my previous selection here. Once I'm done with this here, if I load my face selection and I've got it to where I like it and I want it to actually apply, I'm going to have to apply a layer mask. Okay, so you're going to want to, you know, learn eventually how masks work, because you're going to get back to them either way. Okay guys, that's all I got for you today on this lesson on gradients. That was lesson 5. That was a quick lesson. Gradients are pretty quick, pretty easy to understand, and they are duplicitous. You can use them all over the place. If that helped you out, don't forget to smash that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date on all the most current information that we're putting out here at Pixel Laundry. We thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to create every day, Photoshop fam. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.